The drive to Biddeford seemed endless. The scenery outside the bus window was both familiar and foreign. I hadn't been here in almost 15 years. My name is Keith Browning, and in my 67th year, I am returning to a place I once called home, but now it is only vaguely unsettling. My hands, covered in age spots, clutched tightly to a tattered leather briefcase. Inside were a few books, a couple of changes of clothes, and a picture of Helen, the only thing I'd taken with me from my former life. A year ago, cancer had taken my wife, leaving me alone with an empty apartment and a deafening silence. In 43 years of marriage, we'd never learned to live without each other. Biddeford, final stop, the driver announced, and I struggled to rise from my seat. My knee was aching again, a sure sign of impending rain. The town hadn't changed much. The same narrow streets, the same old houses, and the same leisurely pace of life. I had once taught English literature at the local grammar school, but had left after Lawrence and I had broken up. My son, even in thought, the word reeked with the bitterness of unfulfilled hope. I took a cab to the Primorskaya Hotel, a small two-story building overlooking the harbor. After checking in, I called Lawrence. "Hello." My son's voice sounded tense, like a taut string. "Hello, Lawrence. I'm here." "Good." He paused. "Are you at the seaside?" "Yes. I'll pick you up in an hour." He hung up before I could say goodbye. It was to be expected, though. Our last conversation 15 years ago ended with a slammed door and a promise never to see each other again. It took me an hour to clean myself up. I slicked my gray hair back, put on a fresh shirt and tie. Helen had always said that formality was my way of protecting myself from the world. She was probably right. Exactly 1 hour later, there was a knock at the door. Lawrence stood on the doorstep, a tall man with graying on his temples and my eyes. I noted with surprise the wrinkles around his mouth and the gray tint of his skin. The last time I'd seen him, he'd been 32. Now he was 47. "Siamanarai, father," he nodded, not holding out his hand. "Lawrence," I tried to smile, but it was awkward. "You look good." "Let's go." He turned toward the door. Juno made dinner. Juno, my sister-in-law, a woman I'd only seen in pictures sent by mutual friends. Lawrence got married 3 years after we broke up. I found out about the wedding after the fact. We drove in his old Volvo in silence. I looked at my son's hands gripping the steering wheel, fingers with bitten nails, a wedding ring, a faded scar on his wrist. That scar, I remembered. Lawrence had fallen off his bike when he was 12, and I'd carried him in my arms to the hospital, 6 blocks, panting and promising that everything would be okay. "How did you find out about Helen?" I asked, breaking the silence. Ernie Patterson wrote. "My condolences," he said in a steady voice, not taking his eyes off the road. "Thank you," I coughed. "How's Miriam?" "She must be, by now, 9. She's 9 years old, a granddaughter I've never met, a girl I learned of by accident from Ernie's Christmas card 3 years ago. Lawrence has a lovely daughter growing up," an old friend wrote, not realizing I didn't know she was born. "She looks like you as a child," Lawrence added suddenly softly. "Did she?" Something clenched in my chest. The same stubborn curls and the habit of frowning when she read. He turned down a quiet street of neat houses. He stopped at a 2-story building with a gray tiled roof and a small garden. "Here we are." Lawrence turned off the engine. "Father." He looked me straight in the eye for the first time. "Why did you come here, after all these years?" "Helen died," I shrugged, as if that explained everything. And I thought, what? That I didn't want to die without meeting my own granddaughter. Lawrence looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and got out of the car. I followed him, leaning on my cane. My knee was my enemy in wet weather. The house greeted us with the aroma of baked goods and the sounds of the television. In the hallway, Lawrence helped me take off my coat and led me into the living room, a small room with a sofa, armchairs, and a fireplace where the wood crackled. "Juno," Lawrence called out, "we are here." A woman in her 40s came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was short, with dark hair in a tight bun and sharp features. There was no shadow of friendliness in her brown eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Browning." She inclined her head slightly. "Dinner will be ready soon." "Call me Kit, please." I tried to smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Juno." Likewise, she turned her back to Lawrence. Darling, show your father the house while I finish the casserole. I could detect a note of irritation in her voice, but I chalked it up to the excitement of meeting her father-in-law. Lawrence nodded and led me around the house, showing me the rooms. Everything was neat but impersonal, like a picture from a catalog. No unnecessary details, minimal photos, muted colors. Where's Miriam? I asked, seeing no sign of the child in the house. Probably in her room. Lawrence headed for the stairs. She's a little shy. When we reached the second floor, we stopped at a door with a moon painted on it. Miri, Lawrence knocked. Grandpa is here to see us. Come out to meet him. The door opened slowly, and a small figure with a mop of brown hair and serious gray eyes, my eyes. She wore a simple blue dress with a white collar and unicorn socks. Hello, I said, feeling my throat dry up. I'm Keith, your grandfather. Hello. Her voice was quiet but clear. My name is Miriam. Now that's a very pretty name. I leaned down to be on the same level with her. You know it means bitter in Hebrew. I know, she nodded. It's also the name of Moses' sister. I've read it. I couldn't help but smile. She looks like me in more ways than one. Miriam, help Mom set the table, Lawrence intervened. Okay, Daddy. The girl gave me another glance and disappeared around the corner of the corridor. When we came downstairs, we saw a strange scene. Juno was reprimanding Miriam for something, lowering her voice to a whispering whisper, while the girl stood with her head down. When Juno saw us, she was instantly transformed, a smile lighting up her face. Dinner is ready, she announced. Miriam, baby, help me bring the salad. Yes, Mama, the girl obediently went to the kitchen. At dinner, the conversation didn't go well. Juno asked me about teaching. Lawrence was silent, and Miriam occasionally cast curious glances at me. So you taught English literature, Keith? Juno was fixing herself a salad. It must be fascinating. Very, I nodded, especially when the students read the assigned works rather than the summaries. Grandpa, what's your favorite book? Miriam suddenly asked. Storm Warning by Virginia Woolf, I answered without hesitation. Everything is in it. Life and death, time and art. It's too early for Miriam to read Woolf, Juno intervened. She must first finish the school program. When I was 9, I was already reading Dickens, I said, although I confess I didn't understand a lot of it. Juno pressed her lips together, but didn't say anything. In the silence, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. How long do you plan to stay, kid? She asked at last. A week, maybe 2. I looked at Lawrence. If you don't mind. Of course not, my son answered, but his eyes remained wary. You can always stay with us. Thank you, but I've already taken a room at the hotel. I don't want to make you feel cramped. Juno faintly exhaled in relief. Miriam suddenly dropped her fork, and the sound of metal clinking against porcelain made everyone wince. I'm sorry, the girl mumbled, bending down to pick it up. Leave it, Juno said sharply. You'll stain your dress. I'll pick it up later. The dinner ended with tea and apple pie, which, as it turned out, Miriam had baked under Juno's direction. Delicious, I praised, and the girl's cheeks turned pink with pleasure. Surmirers. Miriam is very capable, Juno said with a smile, but something in her tone made me wary. She has a lot of skills for her age. After dinner, Miriam was sent to bed, despite the early hour. The girl obediently said goodbye to me and went upstairs, while Lawrence and Juno and I went into the parlor. We are sorry for your loss, Kit, said Juno, sitting down in the chair opposite. Lawrence tells me that you and Helen were very close. Yes, I nodded, surprised that Lawrence was talking about me at all. She was everything to me. And that's why you decided to reconnect with your son? There was a subtext in her question that I couldn't quite make out. In part, I looked at Lawrence. And I also wanted to meet Miriam. Lawrence coughed and rose. I'll get the brandy, he said, and left the room, leaving Juno and me alone. You know, Keith, she stepped forward, lowering her voice. I've always thought that family ties were sacred, but sometimes the past is best left in the past. What do you mean? I tensed. Lawrence has suffered a lot since your separation. It took us a long time to build a normal life. She straightened up. I just want you to understand that we can't let past hurts ruin what we have now. I don't intend to ruin anything, I replied firmly. I'm trying to right a wrong. Some mistakes are irreparable, Mr. Browning. Her eyes glittered coldly. And we all live with the consequences. Lawrence returned with a tray containing a bottle of brandy and 3 glasses. The conversation turned to neutral topics: the weather, Lawrence's work at a local construction firm, the city news. But the tension didn't go away. Around 9 p.m., I said it was time for me to head back to the hotel. Lawrence volunteered to drive me, despite my objections. In the car, we were silent again until we reached the Primorskaya. "I'm working tomorrow," Lawrence said, pulling over. "But Miriam will be home. Juno, too. I can come over after lunch," I suggested, "if that's convenient." "Yes," he nodded, looking in front of him. "Father?" I don't know what to say. It's been a long time. 15 years, I sighed. "Lawrence, I don't want to push or intrude on your life. But Helen died and I'm left alone. I'm 67. I just don't want to leave without making peace with my only son." "Do you remember what you said to me then?" His hands gripped the steering wheel. "The last time?" "I do." I turned my back to the window. "And I regret it every day." We were silent again. The rain drummed on the roof of the car, blurring the light of the street lamps. 3 o'clock tomorrow," Lawrence said at last. "Juno bakes cookies on Tuesdays." "I'll be there." I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. "Thank you for letting me see Miriam. She's always asking about you," Lawrence said suddenly. "About her grandfather." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you were a teacher. That we had a fight. That you live far away." "But not the whole truth." "No." Lawrence shook his head. "Not all of it." I nodded and shut the door. The Volvo pulled away, leaving me in the rain at the hotel entrance. In the room, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the dark harbor and the lights of the city. The meeting had gone better than I had expected, and worse than I had hoped. Juno was clearly not happy about my appearance. Something about her attitude toward Miriam bothered me, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Before I went to bed, I pulled out a picture of Helen. She was smiling, sitting on a bench in our garden. "You'd be proud of Miriam," I mentally told her. "She looks like Lawrence as a child, and a little like you." Same smile. As I fell asleep, I thought about tomorrow and Juno's words. Some mistakes are irreparable. She was right, but I had come to Biddeford not to undo the irreparable, but to try to build something new on the ruins of the past. I awoke to the ringing of church bells. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, and outside the hotel window was foggy Biddeford. Today was the day to spend with my granddaughter, and the thought gave me a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety. As I ate breakfast in the hotel's little cafe, I pondered how I would deal with Miriam. What did I know about modern 9-year-old girls? With Lawrence was easier. We went fishing, collected model airplanes, discussed books. None of that kept us from breaking up, though. There was still plenty of time before 3 o'clock, so I decided to take a walk around town. Biddeford had changed less than I'd expected. The same waterfront where Helen and I liked to walk on Sundays. The same old library where I did research for my articles. The Turner and Sons bookshop on the corner of the high street. I remembered Mr. Turner, a gray-haired gentleman with a pipe and a passion for 17th century poetry. I wondered if he was still alive. The store was open, but behind the counter sat a young woman with bright red hair. She responded to my greeting with a casual smile. "I'm sorry," I began. "Mr. Turner, my grandfather died 5 years ago." She adjusted her glasses. "Did you know him?" "Yes, I used to live here. Keith Browning." "Professor Browning?" Her eyes widened. "Grandfather spoke of you often. You wrote articles on Shakespeare's influence on modern literature?" "Yes, I did," I smiled, flattered to be remembered. "I'd like to buy something for my granddaughter. She's 9 years old." The girl, Penelope as it turned out, helped me choose a beautifully illustrated edition of fairy tales and a collection of poems for children. I decided that would be a good start. At exactly 3 o'clock, I stood at the door of Lawrence's house. At my call, the door was opened by Miriam, dressed in a simple gray dress and white apron. "Hello, Grandpa," she said with the same seriousness as yesterday. Mother said you were coming." "Hello, Miriam," I smiled and handed her the package. "It's for you." "For me?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "Thank you." Juno appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a towel. "Keith, good afternoon." Her tone was polite but cold. "Come in, I'm just finishing the cookies." "Hello, Juno," I entered, leaning on my cane. "Smells delicious." Ker- Miriam helped. She glanced at her daughter. "Show Grandpa what you've done, and then finish the dishes." "Yes, Mom." Miriam nodded obediently, but her eyes brightened as she looked at the bag in her hands. We walked to the kitchen where rows of chocolate chip cookies were on the table. Miriam carefully set the bag down and pointed to the far end of the table. "These are the ones I made," she said proudly. "My mom taught me how to shape cookies the right way." "They look great." I leaned over to get a better look. "Your grandmother was a great cook too, especially the apple cinnamon pie." "Can you teach me?" Miriam asked, and something in her voice made my heart clench. "Sure, if it's okay with your mom." I looked at Juno. "Miriam has to finish her chores first," she cut me off. "Simon, the dishes won't wash themselves." "I can help," I offered, but Juno shook her head. "There's no need. She can do it. It's her job. And you, Kit, you must rest. Please go into the living room. It's more comfortable." Miriam gave me an apologetic look and headed for the sink full of dirty dishes. I noticed that for a 9-year-old girl, she looked too used to this kind of work. Her movements were precise and economical, without fuss. In the living room, Yunona offered me tea and sat across from me with her hands folded in her lap. "How did you sleep in Primorskaya?" she asked. "Fine, thank you. The windows overlook the harbor. It's very picturesque. Lawrence said you always loved the sea." I nodded, surprised that my son had said anything about me at all. "We used to go fishing a lot when he was a boy. He was very patient for his age." "Yes, patience was his forte." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "You've been lucky with the weather. It's usually terribly cold here this time of year." The conversation flowed from one safe topic to another until Miriam finished with the dishes and joined us. She sat down on the floor at my feet and opened a bag of gifts. "Books," she exhaled delightedly. "Thank you, Grandpa. I wasn't sure you'd like them." "I love to read." She clutched the books to her chest. "I don't have that many books." Juno coughed. "We have an e-book tablet, Miriam, and a library at school." "It's not the same." The girl opened a collection of poems. "Can I read one out loud?" "Sure," I smiled. She began to read a poem about sea foam and sails, and I was amazed at how well she handled the difficult words. At 9 years old, Lawrence didn't read that fluently. "Excellent," I praised when she had finished. "You have talent." "We need to get on with the housework," Juno intervened. "Miriam, it's time to wash the curtains in your room." "Now?" For the first time, I heard a note of resistance in the girl's voice. "But Grandpa just got here." "That's why it's important to finish things quickly," Juno insisted, "so that you have free time later." "Ah, I can wait," I offered, "or even help. I was a good laundryman when I was young." "No, that won't be necessary." Juno stood up. "Miriam must learn responsibility. It's part of her upbringing." The girl obediently put down her books and went upstairs. When we were alone, Juno looked at me with ill-concealed irritation. "Keith, I appreciate your participation, but please don't undermine my authority." "I'm sorry if I gave you that impression," I said, trying to remain calm. "But don't you think you have too many responsibilities for a child her age?" "Miriam is growing up in a different time," said Juno. "Nowadays, children should learn to be independent early. You haven't seen her in 9 years, so you have no idea of modern parenting methods." I remained silent, but her words made me wonder. Do modern parents really burden their children with so much housework? "In my day," I said, "children as young as 9 played and read books. In your time, Lawrence grew up. What he grew up to be?" Her words hung in the air like a whiplash. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. But you came here as a guest, not as a guidance counselor." We were silent for a moment, looking at each other. I was growing anxious inside, but I knew that an open conflict would only complicate the situation. "I just want to get to know my granddaughter," I said finally, "and if possible, to establish a relationship with my son. Lawrence is very busy at work." Juno stood up. "Would you like some more tea?" "I'm going to make a fresh one." I agreed, and she left for the kitchen. Miriam's footsteps came from the upper rooms, and the noise of the occasional passing car came from the street. I looked around more closely, noticing that there were hardly any pictures in the living room. There was one picture on the mantelpiece: Lawrence, Juno, and little Miriam, all three with equally strained smiles. Half an hour later, Miriam returned, her hands red with water, and her apron showing wet stains. "I'm done, Mom," she announced, peering into the kitchen. "Good." Juno's voice sounded steady. "Now you can stay with Grandpa. Just don't make any noise. I have a headache." Miriam happily sat down next to me on the couch, and we started leafing through the book of fairy tales I had brought. I told her that I had read some of these stories to her father when he was a boy. "Was Daddy like me?" She asked, looking at the dragon illustration. "Very much like him," I smiled, "just as inquisitive and serious, and the same eyes." "Why did you stop talking?" Her question was direct, without childish softness. We had a fight," I answered carefully. "I said things I shouldn't have said." "What things?" "Hard, hurtful things. Sometimes adults hurt the ones they love without wanting to." "Mom says you left Dad when my other grandmother died." I froze. The story Miriam knew had been distorted. Lawrence's mother, my first wife Anne, died of a heart attack when he was 15. I married Helen 2 years later. Our quarrel occurred when Lawrence was 32 and had nothing to do with his mother's death. "That's not quite true," I said gently. "Your grandmother Anna died when your father was 15. We had a fight much later, when he was an adult." "But why then?" "Miriam." Juno's voice sounded harsh. She was standing in the doorway, holding a tray of tea. "Don't bother Grandpa with such questions." "It's all right," I assured her. "Children should know their history." "Not always." Juno set the tray on the table. "Some stories are too complicated for children to understand." The rest of the day passed in a tense atmosphere. I tried to concentrate on Miriam, but I felt Juno's constant supervision. The girl showed me her drawings and her school books. She was studying well, especially in literature and history, but complained that she had little time to read. "Mom says that first things first, then pleasures," she sighed, folding her notebooks. "And there's always so much to do." "What kind of things?" I asked. "Well, laundry, dishes, cleaning. I have to help because Mom works." "What about your homework?" "I do them in the evening, before I go to bed." "Sometimes it's hard to stay awake." She smiled embarrassedly. Lawrence came back around 5, tired and silent. He nodded to me, kissed Miriam on the top of her head, and left to change. Juno immediately sent the girl to set the table and prepare a salad for dinner. "Is she going to be okay on her own?" I asked, watching Miriam chopping vegetables with a knife. "Of course." Juno didn't even turn toward her. "Oh, nah, she's been doing it for 2 years now." At dinner, Lawrence was mostly silent, answering my questions about work with one-word answers. Juno kept the conversation going by talking about her work as an accountant for a local company. Miriam ate in silence, occasionally casting glances back and forth at me and her father. "I'm thinking of inviting my sister for the weekend," Juno suddenly announced. Rebecca had wanted to see Miriam for a long time. "This weekend?" Lawrence frowned. "I have a project." "You're always busy," Juno sounded annoyed. "Rebecca's coming with the kids. They're your family, Lawrence." "Good," he sighed. "Let them come." Miriam visibly tensed at the mention of guests but said nothing. After dinner, she automatically started clearing the table. "I'll help," I offered, standing up. "Don't." Juno put her hand on my shoulder. "It's hard on your knee. Miriam will be fine." "I'm not an invalid," I objected. "Let her do the dishes," Lawrence said unexpectedly. "She's a child, not a housekeeper." Juno flared up but didn't say anything. Instead, she smiled at me. "Of course you're right. Miriam, dear, you don't have to do the dishes today. Go do your homework." "Thank you, Mom." The girl brightened up and ran upstairs, kissing me on the cheek. After she left, the atmosphere became even more tense. Lawrence sat staring at his coffee cup. Juno silently collected the dishes, and I felt like an uninvited guest at someone else's party. "I think I'll be going now," I said, rising. "Thank you for dinner." "I'll drive you." Lawrence stood up. "No, I'll call a cab. I insist," he said, his voice steely. We said goodbye to Juno and walked out. In the car, Lawrence was silent for a long time, then suddenly said, "She's not always like this." "Like what?" I clarified. "Strict with Miriam. It's just that there's been trouble at work lately, and she's taking on too much." "Lawrence," I turned to him, "don't you think Miriam does too much housework for her age?" "Juno thinks it's good parenting." He didn't look at me. "She was raised that way herself." "What about you? What do you think?" "I think," he hesitated. "I think I don't want to go back to that fight, Dad. You came to meet your granddaughter, not to tell me how to run my family. I'm not, I objected. I'm concerned. He pulled up in front of the hotel. That's how it started last time, remember? Your concern, you said Helen would never replace her mother. Your lectures about my mistakes. I flinched as if I'd been hit. Yes, I'd said that. And a lot of other things I shouldn't have said. It had started with a trivial argument about literature. Lawrence had criticized Virginia Woolf. I'd flared up. Word got out, and we got personal. I accused him of ingratitude. He accused me of betraying my mother's memory. I said that Helen had been a better wife than Anna, and he replied that he regretted every day he had spent in my house since her death. Then I said the words that had destroyed our family. If your mother had seen what you had become, she would have regretted having you. I was wrong, I said quietly. Then 15 years ago. I shouldn't have said that. But you did, his voice trembled. And now you're here, trying to tell me how to live my life again? Lawrence, I don't... Just come back tomorrow. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. Miriam will be glad. Just, don't interfere. I nodded and got out of the car. I sat at the window in my room for a long time, thinking about the years I'd spent with my son since Anna's death. She had died suddenly, a heart attack at 38, leaving me with a 15-year-old in my arms. I wasn't coping, drowning my grief in work, drifting away from my son. Meeting Helen saved me, but may have made life difficult for Lawrence. He never accepted her, even though she tried sincerely to find an approach to him. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. I came in the afternoon, spent time with Miriam, watched Juno load her with housework, tried to intervene gently, and was rebuffed. Lawrence remained passive, as if absent even by being physically present. The only bright spot was Miriam's joy at my visits and her avid interest in books and stories. On the 4th day, Friday, I arrived earlier than usual and found Juno talking on the telephone in the garden. She hadn't noticed me, and I overheard part of the conversation. Yes, Rebecca, everything is ready for your arrival, she said. Miriam will prepare everything, don't worry. No, I'm not going to spend money on catering when I've got a free assistant. Yes, you can imagine. She'll even bake a cake. I've trained her. I froze, feeling the anger building up inside. Juno was talking about her own daughter as a servant. Old man, Juno continued. Oh, he'll be leaving soon. He came to play the caring grandfather, but he won't last long. Yeah, just like that time with her father. Look, Becky, he's easy to chase away with a little reminder of the past and he'll run away. I retreated quietly around the corner of the house, shocked by what I'd heard. Everything fell into place now. Miriam's overburdening, Lawrence's passivity, and Juno's coldness. I had to decide what to do with this information and how to protect my granddaughter without destroying my relationship with my son. Saturday was sunny but cool. I woke up with a feeling of uneasiness that had been lingering ever since I had overheard Juno talking to her sister. Her relatives were due to arrive today, and I decided I was obliged to be there for Miriam's sake. After breakfast, I went to a small cafe with internet, where I found the number of an old acquaintance of mine, Edmund Coleman. Edmund had once been one of the best lawyers in Biddeford, but was now probably retired. But if anyone could help me find out anything about Juno's past, it was him. To my surprise, Edmund answered after the first beep. Coleman here. His voice sounded as commanding as it had 15 years ago. Edmund, this is Keith Browning. Do you still remember me? Oh my God, Keith, he exclaimed. Of course I do. Are you in town? We have to meet. I've come to visit my son and granddaughter for a few days. Oh yes, little Miriam, he said, a strange note in his voice. How is she? I'm worried about her, Edmund, I admitted, and I need your help. We agreed to meet in an hour at his office. It turned out that Edmund was still practicing, albeit on a smaller scale. His office, littered with files and books, was just as I remembered it. So, Edmund said as we sat down at his massive oak desk, what's troubling you? Juno Browning, Lawrence's wife, I mused. I think there's something wrong with her. What is it? She treats Miriam like a servant. She makes her cook, clean, do her laundry. The girl's only 9 years old, Edmund. And yesterday I overheard her talking to her sister on the telephone. And she called her granddaughter free help. Edmund frowned and drummed his fingers on the table. I knew this would happen, he muttered. I knew it from the beginning. What do you mean? Kit, I didn't mean to interfere in your son's affairs, but since you're asking, Juno Hatfield, now Browning, is a dark horse. She turned up in Biddeford 10 years ago, got a job as an accountant at Primrose Construction, where Lawrence worked. 6 months later, they were married. Nothing strange, I shrugged. Office romance. That's not the point. Before I licensed her as an accountant, I did a standard background check. Found something interesting. Edmund opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder. Juno Hatfield, née Summers, was married before Lawrence, to one Raymond Hatfield of Manchester. The marriage lasted 3 years and ended in divorce after Raymond accused her of stealing the family savings. I felt my heart clench with alarm. Was there evidence? Not enough for a trial, but enough for a divorce. Edmund turned the page. And here's what's more interesting. 2 years after the divorce, Juno was investigated for fraud. She worked as an accountant in a small transport company and, according to the investigation, withdrew about £50,000. The case was closed for lack of evidence. A key witness refused to testify, and she moved to Biddeford. I finished for him. Exactly. Edmund closed the folder. I warned Lawrence when I heard about the engagement. He said he knew of her past and that I should stay away from his family. But he could not know, exclaimed I. Lawrence would never. Lovers often can't see beyond their own noses. Edmund shrugged his shoulders. Anyway, now you know. I left Edmund's office with a heavy heart and the folder he'd given me a copy of. On the way to Lawrence's house, I pondered what to do with this information. Confrontation with Juno could lead to a complete break with my son, but inaction meant leaving Miriam hostage to a woman with a questionable past. As I approached the house, an unfamiliar car was parked in the driveway. Juno's relatives had already arrived. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Miriam opened the door, flushed and out of breath. Grandpa, she was overjoyed. You're here. As promised, I smiled. How are the guests doing? Aunt Rebecca and the cousins arrived an hour ago. Her voice sounded strained. Mom asked me to help with dinner. I entered the house and immediately heard loud voices from the living room. Juno introduced me to her sister, Rebecca Clark, a full woman with equally sharp facial features, and her 2 sons, 12-year-old Peter and 10-year-old Evan. Lawrence sat in the corner of the room with a newspaper, pretending to read. Nice to meet you, Rebecca nodded, giving me an appraising look. Eunice told me about you. Nothing bad, I hope, I tried to joke. Not at all. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. The conversation wasn't going well. Rebecca and Juno were discussing some mutual acquaintances. The boys were playing with their consoles, and Lawrence occasionally looked up from his paper. Miriam bustled around bringing drinks and snacks. Where have you been? Juno asked abruptly when Miriam brought a plate of cheese. I asked you to check the pie 5 minutes ago. I was setting the table in the dining room, the girl replied quietly. Pie first, Juno cut her off. Go and see if it's burned. Miriam obediently disappeared into the kitchen. I saw Rebecca and Juno exchange understanding glances. Children, Rebecca sighed. No responsibility. Miriam is very responsible for her age, I argued. Too much so. What do you mean? Juno squinted at me. Only that at 9, children should be playing, not cooking dinner for guests. There was a tense silence in the room. Lawrence finally put down the paper and looked at me with a warning look in his eyes. Every family has its own rules, Keith, Juno said coldly. In our family, children learn useful skills from an early age. I see, I nodded. And how long has Miriam been learning these useful skills? Father, Lawrence said warningly. It's all right, dear. Juno put her hand on his shoulder. Your father is simply not familiar with modern methods of upbringing. In his time, it was customary to spoil children. She looked at me with superiority, and I felt anger boiling up inside. But I restrained myself, realizing that an open conflict now would not solve anything. Lunch was ready by 2 o'clock. The table was bursting with dishes, baked chicken, potato gratin, 3 kinds of salad, and apple pie for dessert. Miriam looked exhausted but proud. Did you cook all this yourself? I asked quietly when she sat down next to me. Almost, she whispered. Mom helped with the chicken. At dinner, the conversation revolved around Rebecca's job at the insurance company, her son's success in sports and Juno's plans for renovating the house. The boys ate in silence, occasionally elbowing each other. Lawrence answered when addressed, but mostly focused on his food. "Miriam," Rebecca said suddenly, "the pie's a little dry. I should have put more butter in the pastry." "I'll make it better next time, Auntie," she said obediently. "Of course you will," nodded Juno. "Now bring coffee for the grown-ups." "And ice cream," Peter put in. "And ice cream," confirmed Juno. "Hurry up, everyone's waiting." Miriam jumped up and ran into the kitchen. A moment later, there was the sound of breaking glass and muffled crying. "God, not that!" Juno rolled her eyes. "What else is there?" I got up before she did and hurried into the kitchen. Miriam was standing in the middle of the shattered coffee pot, clutching her burned hand to her chest. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to. It was too hot." I rushed to her, gently pulling her away from the shards. "Show me your hand," I said softly. "I need to rinse it with cold water." But no sooner had I brought her to the sink than Juno flew into the kitchen. "What have you done?" she screamed when she saw the broken coffee pot. "It was an antique, a gift from my grandmother." "Juno," I tried to intervene. "She burned herself." "She's clumsy and irresponsible." Juno interrupted me. "Nasino, clean up this mess immediately and make new coffee. My sister and her children are hungry." Miriam, still sobbing, reached for the broom. I intercepted her hand. "No," I said firmly. "We must treat the burn first." "Don't interfere, Keith," Juno hissed. "This is my daughter, and I know what's best for her." "Do you?" I straightened up, looking her in the eye. "Then why are you treating her like a servant? Why is a 9-year-old making dinner for 7 while your nephews play video games?" Lawrence, Rebecca, and the boys appeared in the kitchen doorway, attracted by the noise. "What's going on here?" Lawrence frowned. "Your father thinks he knows better than I do how to bring up Miriam," said Juno wryly. "Once again, he is meddling in our affairs." "I think a child with a burn should be treated first, and then forced to clean," I said. "And you shouldn't make her cook for the whole family at her age." Lawrence walked over to his daughter and examined her arm. "You need to hold it under cold water," he said, and led Miriam to the sink. "Una, where's the first aid kit?" "In the bathroom," she mumbled. "But first, let him clean up." "Hand first," Lawrence said firmly, surprising me with his determination. Uno's lips tightened, but she remained silent. I took advantage of the pause to pull from my pocket the folder Edmund had given me. "You shouldn't have bullied my granddaughter, Juno," I said quietly but clearly, "especially considering your own past." "What are you talking about?" Her eyes narrowed. "About Raymond Hatfield and the 50,000 pounds missing from North Star Transport." Juno turned pale, and Rebecca aghast and pressed her hand to her mouth. "What nonsense is this?" Juno tried to be indignant, but her voice trembled. "It's not nonsense." I opened the folder. "Here are the documents on your divorce, where the reason is explicitly stated, financial impropriety of the wife. And here are the investigation files on the case of embezzlement in the transportation company. The case was closed for lack of evidence, but there's no smoke without fire, right?" Lawrence stood at the sink, still holding his daughter's hand under the running water. "What's he saying, Una?" he asked in a muffled voice. "He's lying, Dash," she exclaimed. "Your father always hated me, you know that." "I didn't even know you until this week," I objected. "But now I know that you hid your first marriage and your legal troubles from my son. And I see how you treat my granddaughter." Juno straightened up, her face contorted with rage. "Get out of my house," Dash, she hissed. "Now, this is my house too," Lawrence said, suddenly firm. "And I want to know the truth. Is it true, Una? Did you have another husband?" Juno glared at him fiercely, then turned to her sister, as if seeking support. But Rebecca took a step back, clutching her sons to her. "Yes, I was," said Juno at last. "But it doesn't matter. It was a long time ago, before you." "And the charge of theft?" Lawrence insisted. "Slander," Dash, she exclaimed. "Raymond wanted revenge for my leaving him. And the embezzlement case," I continued to press. "Unproven accusations," Juno snapped back. "The case was dropped." Lawrence took his eyes off her face and looked at Miriam, who was looking from one adult to the other, frightened. "You said you'd never been married," he said quietly. that I was your first and only one. I didn't mean to upset you. Juno took a step toward him. It was a mistake of youth. I wanted to forget it. And that's why you kept it from me? Lawrence's voice sounded painful. All these years? Rebecca coughed suddenly and took a step toward the door. We should probably go, she said awkwardly. Peter, Evan, get ready. But the ice cream, Peter protested. Quiet, his mother shouted at him. Una, we'll talk to you later. Juno didn't even look in her direction, continuing to glare at Lawrence. Do you trust him more than you trust me? She asked defiantly. The man who abandoned you for 15 years? I don't believe either of you, Lawrence answered. But the papers don't lie. And I see how you treat Miriam. He turned to me. Where did you get these documents from? From Edmund Coleman, I answered. He vetted Juno before she was licensed as an accountant, and he warned you about her, but you didn't listen. Edmund, Lawrence grinned bitterly. Of course I did. Miriam sobbed quietly, holding her wet hand to her chest. I went over to her and put my arm around her shoulders. It's going to be okay, I whispered. I promise. Don't you dare touch my daughter. Una rushed toward us, but Lawrence caught her by the elbow. That's enough, Una. His voice sounded tired. Just enough. Rebecca and the boys had already left, leaving the front door open. There was an oppressive silence in the house, broken only by Miriam's quiet sobs. Papa, Lawrence said at last without looking at me. Take Miriam to the hotel. Juno and I need to talk. No, exclaimed Juno. She's staying here. This is her home. She'd better be with her grandfather now, Lawrence said firmly. And we'll talk about all this, and your past and the way you treat our daughter. Juno looked from him to me, and then she laughed, a harsh, unpleasant laugh. Sornin. Oh, so that's your plan, old man? She shook her head. Destroy my family? To get back at my son for choosing me over you? It won't work. Lawrence would never believe I'd hurt Miriam. She's my daughter, and I'm doing what I think is best for her upbringing. You're forcing a 9-year-old child to work as a servant, I objected. That's not parenting, that's exploitation. A child should know his place, Juno said, and to be useful. Lawrence shuddered as if struck by a blow. That's what you said about the neighbor boy you made mow our lawn, he said slowly. A child should know his place, and then I didn't pay any attention to it. That's different, Juno dismissed him. Miriam is my daughter. I have the right to raise her as I see fit. Not if it harms her, Lawrence objected. Papa's right. We demand too much of her. Juno stared at him in amazement, as if she had seen him for the first time. Do you take his side? Her voice trembled with rage. After everything he's done to you? I'm not taking sides, Lawrence replied tiredly. I just want my daughter to be happy, and right now she clearly isn't. He turned to Miriam and me. Go, he said quietly. I'll call you when we've sorted out. You can't do this. Juno raised her voice. I'm the one who's been taking care of Miriam all these years. I'm teaching her to be independent, preparing her for life, and you and your father want to raise her to be a useless sissy. Una, Lawrence shook his head. She's 9 years old. She should be playing and learning, not cooking dinner for your sister. Juno turned even paler, her lips pressed into a thin line. So that's how it is, she hissed. You're conspiring against me. Well, fine, but mark my words, you will regret it. Both of you. I took Miriam's hand and led her out. She walked in silence, sobbing only occasionally. On the threshold, I turned around. Lawrence and Juno stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at each other like strangers. I'll be at the hotel, I said to my son. Call me when you can. He nodded, not taking his eyes off his wife. I closed the door behind us and led Miriam to the cab I'd ordered before the visit. Only once I was in the safety of the hotel room did I allow myself to exhale. The plan had worked, but at what cost? Hadn't I just destroyed my son's family? Miriam sat on the edge of the bed, holding her burned hand. I carefully treated the burn with the ointment from the medicine cabinet and bandaged it. Forney. Grandpa, she finally said in a quiet voice. What's going to happen now? I don't know, baby, I answered honestly. But I promise that no one will ever make you work as an adult again. You deserve a normal childhood. She nodded and then suddenly snuggled against me, wrapping her arms around my neck. Thank you, she whispered. Yeah, I'm so tired of cooking and cleaning every day. I hugged her, feeling a lump rise to my throat. In that moment, I realized I had done the right thing, even if Lawrence would never forgive me. For Miriam's sake, I was willing to lose my son again. The evening at the hotel dragged on endlessly. Miriam had fallen asleep, exhausted by the events of the day, and I sat at the window, gazing out into the thickening twilight over the harbor. The telephone was silent. No call from Lawrence, no message. What was going on in their house now? What were they talking about? Was Juno repenting or continuing to insist that she was right? Miriam slept restlessly, sometimes sobbing in her sleep. I covered her with a second blanket and put the pillow higher. Her bandaged arm rested on top of the blanket. Unfortunately, the burn wasn't too severe, physical at least. But what wounds were left in the girl's soul was another question. Around 10 p.m., the phone finally rang. I rushed out into the hallway so as not to wake my granddaughter. Lawrence. Yes, my son's voice sounded tired. How's Miriam? She's asleep. Her arm doesn't hurt much. I treated the burn. How are you? I don't know, he sighed. This whole thing. Too much information all at once. Did you talk? You could say that, he sounded bitter. She admitted she was married to Hatfield. She said she didn't want to upset me, so she hid it. And as for the theft and fraud charges, she denies it. Claims she was set up. Do you believe her? I don't know, he said again. 10 years of marriage, Father. 10 years I thought I knew my wife. I was silent, not knowing what to say. It's hard to give advice when you've failed your own marriage so badly that you've lost touch with your son for 15 years. What about Miriam, I finally asked. Did you talk about the way Juno treats her? Yes, Lawrence sighed again. She thinks she's doing the right thing, that a girl should be able to cook and clean, that those are normal skills for a child. And I just didn't notice how far gone it was, or didn't want to. Would you let me keep Miriam overnight? I asked. She needed a break from all this. Yeah, sure, he paused. Dad, I was wondering, why did you decide to check on Juno? I was worried about Miriam, I answered honestly. And I overheard Juno talking to her sister. She referred to her granddaughter as her free assistant Jesus, Lawrence exhaled. How could I not have seen it? There was so much pain in his voice that I couldn't help but think of him as a 15-year-old boy who'd lost his mother. Just as lost, just as vulnerable behind the mask of aloofness. Shianono, we often don't see what's happening right in front of our eyes, I said softly, especially when it comes to loved ones. You're right, he said quietly. I'll stop by tomorrow morning. We need to decide what to do next. Of course, I looked at my watch. Lawrence, I know you haven't forgiven me for what I said, and you shouldn't, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, what you did today. Thank you, his voice trembled. See you tomorrow, Dad. I went back to the room and found Miriam awake. She was sitting up with her healthy arm around her knees, looking at me with huge, anxious eyes. Was that Daddy? She asked. Yes. I sat down next to her. He's coming to see us tomorrow morning. Is Mommy with him? I don't know, honey. Maybe. Miriam nodded and was silent again. I could see that she wanted to ask something, but she didn't dare. Is something else bothering you? I asked gently. You. Are you and Daddy going to fight over me? Her voice was barely audible. No, of course not, I took her hand. No one is fighting over you. On the contrary, your dad and I want you to be happy. And Mom says that happiness has to be earned. She lowered her eyes. That you have to get things done first and then you have to think about fun. I suppressed a sigh. It's classic manipulation to make a child feel like they have to earn love and the right to rest. Miriam, listen to me. I gently lifted her chin so she was looking into my eyes. You don't have to earn the right to be happy. You deserve to be happy simply because of who you are. Do you understand? She nodded uncertainly, but I could see the doubt in her gaze. How many years had Juno beaten the opposite into her head? Tell me about your typical day, I asked, trying to understand the scope of the problem. A typical day, Miriam thought for a moment. I get up at 6:30, make my bed, wash my face, and make breakfast. Then I wake up Mom and Dad and serve breakfast. Then I clear the table, wash the dishes, and get ready for school. Who walks you to school? I walk myself, it's not far, she shrugged. After school, I come home, do the cleaning, and start cooking dinner. My mom comes around 5 o'clock and checks if I've done everything. Then we have dinner, I do the dishes and homework. And then, if there's time, I can read or watch cartoons. And if there's no time, then I just go to bed. She said it so matter-of-factly that my heart sank. Weekends are more work because I have to do the general cleaning and cooking for 2 days in advance. Do the other kids in your class help out around the house that much too? No, Miriam shook her head. They go to dances, to the pool, and play in the park. But Mom says I need to learn to be a good hostess, that it's more important than having silly fun. And how long have you been helping your mom like this? Since I was 7, she answered. At first, I just did the dishes and dusted. Then my mom taught me how to cook. And last year, I learned how to do laundry. 7 years. 2 years she worked as a housekeeper, and no one interfered. Where were the teachers, the neighbors? Where the hell was Lawrence all this time? Do you like cooking and cleaning? I asked, trying to remain calm. Sometimes, she smiled uncertainly. I like baking pies, but I don't like it when my mom yells that I'm doing something wrong. And I also don't like that I don't have much time to read and draw. I pulled her to me and hugged her, trying not to hurt her burned arm. Things will change, Miriam, I promised. Starting tomorrow, everything will be different. Really? There was disbelief in her voice. Really? I kissed the top of her head. Now let's go to sleep. Tomorrow will be a big day. In the morning, Miriam woke up at 7 and immediately jumped up, panicking that she'd overslept and hadn't made breakfast. I had to tell her several times that it was okay, that she could sleep as much as she wanted today. But who's going to make Daddy breakfast? She worried. Daddy is a grown man. He can take care of himself, I smiled. Just like your mom. I ordered breakfast for the room, pancakes with maple syrup, scrambled eggs, fruit salad, and hot chocolate. Miriam stared at all this splendor with wide-open eyes. All this? For us? Sure. I slid a plate of pancakes over to her. Come on, you're not cooking or cleaning anything today. You're just resting. She hesitantly took the fork and cut off a piece of pancake. She tasted it, and her face lit up with a smile. It's good. You see? I winked at her. Sometimes it's nice to have someone else cook, isn't it? After breakfast, we read the book of fairy tales I had given her. Miriam was a very expressive reader. She changed her voice for different characters and made dramatic pauses at the right places. You read very well, I praised her. Just like an actress. I like to read aloud, she admitted. Sometimes when Mommy and Daddy are gone, I read to my toys. I imagine I'm a teacher. Would you like to be a teacher when you grow up? I don't know, she pondered. My mom says I should study accounting like her, that it's a safe profession. About 11 o'clock, there was a knock at the door of the room. I opened it and saw Lawrence, pale, with dark circles under his eyes, but determined. Hello, he tried to smile. Can I come in? Sure, I stepped back. Miriam, look who's here, Daddy. She rushed to him, hugging him with her big arm. I missed you so much. I missed you too, Princess. Lawrence hugged her, and I could see his hands trembling. How is your arm? It hardly hurts anymore. She showed him the bandage. Grandpa said the burn wasn't serious. That's good. He kissed the top of her head. Miriam, honey, I need to talk to Grandpa. Can you read or watch TV for a while? Sure, Daddy. She obediently sat down on the bed and opened a book. Lawrence and I went out into the hallway. How did it go? I asked as soon as the door closed. Lousy. He ran his hand over his face. We spent half the night yelling at each other. Juno was crying and threatening, claiming that you set it all up to destroy our family, that the documents were forgeries. Did you believe her? No, he shook his head. I called Edmund myself, and he confirmed everything you said. Then I asked Juno directly about Miriam, about why a 9-year-old child cooks and cleans more than my wife. And what did she say? That it's the right thing to do. Lawrence grinned bitterly. That she was doing Miriam a favor by teaching her order and responsibility. I called Edmund while Miriam was reading. I needed a plan in case Juno got aggressive. If she wanted to hurt Lawrence, she could try to take Miriam through the courts, the lawyer said. She'll claim he's incapable of caring for the child. She's got a lot on her plate, I argued. Dash her past, her treatment of the girl. All of that has to be proven, Edmund sighed. We need witnesses. Teachers, neighbors, anyone who saw Juno treat the child. When I finished talking, Miriam came over to me with a notebook and pencils. "Grandpa, can I draw?" "Sure, honey." I patted the couch next to me. "Sit down. Do you like to draw?" "Very much." She sat down next to me, but I hardly ever had time before. I watched as she drew the lines with the tip of her tongue hanging out. A normal girl who was finally allowed to be a child. "Miriam," I began gently, "you go to school. Do you have any friends?" "A few." She continued to draw. "Mommy says friendship distracts you from studying and chores. And the teachers? They never asked why you work so much at home?" "I haven't told anyone." She looked up. "Mom said it was our family business and no one should know." "I understand." I nodded. "And you yourself, do you think it's normal the way you used to live?" Miriam thought for a moment, twirling her pencil in her fingers. "I don't know," she said at last. "I thought that was the way it was supposed to be, that all children help their parents. But then I saw how the other kids lived." She stopped, biting her lip. They played after school. They went to movies and dance classes. They had time to just be kids. There was a longing in her voice that made my heart ache. "Would you want to live like that?" I asked softly. "To go dancing or painting? To play with your friends?" "Very much," she whispered. "I've always wanted to learn to paint for real, and play the piano, and to swim." "Now you can." I put my arm around her shoulders. "I promise." "You do?" Her eyes lit up with hope. "Will my mom let me?" "Your dad will," I smiled. "And Mom, well, she'd have to say yes." Miriam nodded and went back to her drawing. I watched her, realizing we had a long way to go. Juno wouldn't just let them go. That much was clear. But for the sake of this child, it was worth the fight. 3 days were spent in the work of setting up Lawrence and Miriam's new apartment. I helped as much as I could. I bought the necessary things, entertained my granddaughter while my son was at work, cooked simple lunches. Lawrence seemed both determined and lost, as if he didn't fully realize what had happened. With Juno, they communicated only through messages. She demanded to return Miriam. He refused. No one had spoken openly about the divorce yet, but the air rang with the unspoken. Miriam was blossoming. Already on the second day in the new apartment, she stopped jumping up at dawn to prepare breakfast. On the third, began to timidly ask for things that she had previously considered inaccessible. To go to the park, buy paints, watch cartoons. Lawrence agreed to everything, eagerly making up for lost parental attention. On the fourth day after our escape from Juno's house, I woke up to the ringing of the phone. It was early morning, and the sun was barely breaking through the blinds in the hotel room. "Keith Browning here," I answered hoarsely. "Dad, it's me." Lawrence's voice sounded strained. "We need to talk. Alone. Is something wrong?" "Juno's hired a lawyer. She's threatening to sue for Miriam's kidnapping." "But that's absurd." I was outraged. "You're her father, I know. But she claims that I'm acting under your influence, that you've turned me against her, and that I'm not capable of caring for a child on my own." "That's bullshit," I snorted. "She has no proof." "Maybe, but I'm still worried," Lawrence said quietly. "I'll be at your place in an hour. Miriam's staying with a neighbor, and she's agreed to keep an eye on things." "Okay, I'll be waiting." I took a quick shower and got dressed. My thoughts were confused. How could Juno have acted so quickly? She must have started preparing as soon as Lawrence took Miriam. Cunning and calculating, she was not going to give up without a fight. Exactly an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Lawrence looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, a gaunt face, a wrinkled shirt. "Come in," I stepped aside. "Coffee?" "Yes, please." He sank heavily into the chair. The stronger, the better. While I fiddled with the coffee maker, Lawrence stared out the window in silence. His fingers drummed nervously on the armrest, a habit left over from childhood. "Here." I handed him the steaming cup. "Tell me more about it." "Edmund called this morning. Juno has gone to Elizabeth Thorne, one of the toughest divorce specialists in Biddeford, and she's suing me for sole custody of Miriam." "On what grounds?" "Darnhinam, on the grounds that I'm mentally unstable, mentally compromised," he gave me a guilty look, "and unable to provide the child with the proper level of care." I shook my head. It's a classic tactic to deny the obvious and turn the situation around by making yourself look like the victim. And you believe these accusations? I asked cautiously. No, of course not, Lawrence grinned bitterly. I know I'm a good father. At least I try to be. The problem is that for the past few years, I've really had little involvement in Miriam's upbringing. Juno took over everything, and I just let her. I was silent, giving him time to gather his thoughts. You know what the worst part is? He finally said it. I suspected it. Not right away, but for the last 3 years. I've seen her putting Miriam to work. The way she yells at her for the slightest mistake, manipulating her, promising her love and attention in exchange for obedience. Why didn't you do anything? Afraid? He shrugged. Afraid of breaking up the family. Afraid of being alone. Afraid I wouldn't be able to raise my daughter? Small-minded, in a word, I sighed. Fear of breaking up a family was something I knew all too well. I'd been afraid to change things in my time too, even when I'd seen problems with my son after his mother died. I'm not judging you, I said quietly. We all make mistakes, especially when it comes to family. You've never been this wrong, Lawrence objected. You wouldn't let someone abuse a child. I was wrong in a different way, I shook my head. After Anna's death, I was so absorbed in my own grief that I didn't notice yours. Working around the clock, leaving you alone, and then bringing you to Helen's house without asking if you were ready? Lawrence looked up at me in surprise. You never admitted it before. Because I was too proud, I grinned unhappily. I thought I was doing everything right, that Helen was the best thing that could have happened to both of us. I didn't realize that to you she was a stranger trying to take her mother's place. We were silent, looking at each other after 15 years of estrangement. So many unspoken words, so many missed moments. I was unfair to Helen, Lawrence said at last. She tried, and I pushed her away at every turn. She understood, I smiled, remembering my wife. She said you were entitled to your feelings, and that one day you'd realize she wasn't trying to replace your mother. She was right, Lawrence sighed. Too bad I realized it too late. She knew. I looked at the picture of Helen on the nightstand. Shortly before she died, she said to me, "One day you'll make up with Lawrence, and I want you to tell him that I always loved him like a son." Lawrence's eyes filled with tears, and he turned away to the window. I gave him time to get over his emotions. We Brownings were never good at crying in public. You know, he said at last, his voice hoarse from holding back tears, that's why I married Juno. She was the complete opposite of Helen. Practical, rational, without sentimentality. I thought she was exactly what I needed. We often choose the wrong people for the wrong reasons, I said, especially when we're trying to escape the past. Yeah, he nodded. I liked that she was so definite, always knew what she wanted, always had a plan. I just didn't realize that her plan included turning our daughter into a servant. You couldn't have seen that coming, I put my hand on his shoulder. No one knows what people will be like until you've lived with them long enough. It's not just that, Lawrence shook his head. I saw the signs, didn't I? How she controlled every little thing. How she demanded perfection in everything. How she had no tolerance for objection. But I was comfortable. She took over all the chores, all the decisions, all the responsibility, and I just went with the flow. I kept quiet, realizing my son needed to talk. How many years had he kept it all inside? When Miriam was born, I was happy, he continued. I thought we'd have a real family now. Juno seemed like the perfect mother, caring, attentive. But as Miriam grew older, everything changed. Juno started demanding more and more from her. At first it was small things, putting away toys, helping with the dishes, then the big chores. And I just watched and didn't say a word. You were afraid of conflict, I said softly. That's understandable. No, I was afraid of being wrong, he countered. Afraid that my idea of parenting was outdated. That Juno was right. That children really should be put to work from an early age. After all, I grew up in a different time myself. I sighed, remembering how Lawrence had helped around the house as a child. But those had been simple, age-appropriate tasks, not full-fledged housekeeping. There's a limit to everything, I said. Even responsibility training. I only realize that now. Lawrence finished his coffee and set it on the table. When I saw Miriam blossom away from Juno, how she was just playing, reading, drawing for the first time in a long time. How she smiles when she doesn't have to cook or clean. And what are you going to do? Fight. His voice sounded firm. For Miriam, for her right to be a child. Even if it means going through the courts, the mud, whatever Juno has to throw at us. I'm with you. I squeezed his shoulder. What can I do for you? I need your support, he looked me in the eye. And not just morally. Edmund says the case could be long and expensive. I have some savings, but if Juno blocks the joint account... Don't worry about the money, I interrupted. I have enough. I'll pay all the legal fees and lawyers. Thank you, he nodded. There's one more thing. Edmund thinks we need witnesses, people who can confirm how Juno treated Miriam. Teachers at the school? I suggested. Neighbors? Maybe, he pondered. But Juno is very careful. In public, she's always the perfect mother. She only yells at Miriam at home, behind closed doors. And Rebecca? I remembered Juno's sister. She was obviously aware of the situation. Would she be willing to testify? I doubt it. Lawrence shook his head. She and Juno are very close. But we can try. We discussed a few more options, and then Lawrence suddenly asked, Dad, why are you here now? After 15 years of silence, I took a deep breath, the question I had been waiting for and dreading. I've been rethinking a lot of things since Helen died, I began. We'd been together for almost 40 years, and all that time she'd been trying to convince me to reconcile with you. Said life was too short for pride and resentment. I resisted, said you didn't want to see me, and then she died, and I was alone. All alone. I paused, searching for words. You know what the worst thing about being alone is? It's not the silence or the absence of someone. It's the realization that no one needs you anymore. That if you disappeared, no one would notice. I couldn't live with that. So I decided to take the risk of coming to see you, meet your granddaughter. Worst case scenario, you just slam the door in my face. I thought about it, Lawrence admitted. The first day you called, I didn't want to see you. But then I thought of Miriam, that she had a right to know her grandfather, and I decided to give you a chance. I'm grateful for that, I smiled. Oh. And I'm glad I came, even if the circumstances were difficult. I'm glad too, Lawrence said suddenly. Not about what happened with Juno, but that you're here, that we're finally talking, really talking, not throwing around accusations. We were silent again, but now the silence was comfortable, tensionless. It was as if something had broken between us, some barrier that had held for 15 years. What do you remember about our last fight? I asked at last. Everything, Lawrence grimaced, every word. I said that Helen would never replace my mother. You replied that she wasn't trying to, that she just loved me like a son. I accused you of betraying Mom's memory by marrying so soon after her death. You got angry and said that Helen was a better wife than Anna ever was, I finished, feeling a lump come up in my throat. And that if your mother had seen what you'd become, she would have regretted having you. Horrible, unforgivable words. I've said some terrible things too, Lawrence shook his head. That I regret every day I spent in your house. That you've always been a lousy father. That Helen was a whore who crawled into bed with you while Mom's body was still warm. I flinched at those words. Yes, I remembered that too. I remembered how rage clouded my mind, how I'd almost hit my son, but instead I'd kicked him out the door. We've both said things we regret, I said quietly. The question is whether we can put it behind us. I think we can, Lawrence looked at me seriously. For Miriam's sake, and maybe for my own sake too. I nodded, feeling the warmth inside me. Not all was lost. Maybe we could build something new out of the ruins of our family. What do you know about Juno's plans? I asked, returning to the problem at hand. Apart from the trial? Not much, he frowned. Edmund says she's been consulting with several lawyers, and apparently she's gathering evidence of my incompetence as a father. Such as what? Pictures of the empty refrigerator in our new apartment, pictures of unwashed dishes, recordings of conversations with Miriam saying she misses her mom. She came to the apartment? I'm tense. No, but she has keys to the old house. She took some of Miriam's things and took pictures of what was left. I guess she wants to prove that I'm not providing for the child. Dash petty and mean, I shook my head. But predictable. There's something else, Lawrence paused. Edmund found out that Juno had withdrawn almost all the money from our joint account, and he'd found some strange transfers over the last year. Large sums of money going to a firm in Manchester. Manchester? I was worried. That's where her first husband, Hatfield, lived. Exactly, Lawrence nodded. Edmund is checking now to see if the firm is connected with him. If it turns out that she's been in contact with her ex-husband all this time and hiding it, that would be a strong argument in court, I finished for him, especially if you consider that she denied the fact of the first marriage. Yeah, he rubbed the bridge of his nose. God, how could I have been so blind? 10 years of living with a man and not knowing him. We see what we want to see, I shrugged, especially when it comes to loved ones. We talked for another hour or so, discussing strategy for the upcoming trial. Lawrence told me that he planned to file a countersuit to terminate Juno's parental rights on the grounds of child abuse. Are you sure it's worth going that far? I asked cautiously. No, he sighed. But Edmund believes that the best defense is offense. If we only defend, Juno will eat us alive. She knows how to manipulate, how to make herself look like a victim. What does Miriam think about all this? She's afraid, Lawrence shook his head. She doesn't say it directly, but I can see it. She shudders at the mention of her mother, wakes up at night with nightmares. Yesterday, she broke a cup and burst into tears, begging me not to punish her. What did she do to our daughter, Dad? There was such desperation in his voice that I wanted to hug him, like when I was a kid. But we're long past the age where hugs solve problems. Miriam needs professional help, I said. A child psychologist. These things don't go away on their own. I know, he nodded. Edmund has already recommended a good therapist. The first appointment is tomorrow. Lawrence finished his coffee and stood up, walking to the window. Biddeford Harbor was visible behind the glass, drenched in the morning sun. The small town where Anna and I had started our lives, where Lawrence had been born, where I had met Helen, a town full of ghosts of the past. You know, Lawrence said without turning around, I've often thought of reconciling with you, especially after Miriam was born. I wanted her to know her grandfather, but pride prevented me from taking the first step. Here are some. We're both to blame, I stood next to him. I could have called or written too, but I was afraid of rejection. It's ironic, he smiled weakly. We both wanted the same thing, but we couldn't get over our pride. Life often teaches us lessons too late, I sighed. I'm glad we have a chance to right at least some of the wrongs. Me too, he turned to me. Thank you for coming, and for opening my eyes to Miriam's situation. I just did what I had to do. I shrugged, protected my family. Suddenly, Lawrence's cell phone rang. He took it out of his pocket, glanced at the screen, and frowned. It's Edmund, he said, answering the call. Yes, Edmund. What? When? Yes, of course. I'll come over right away. He hung up and I saw the blood drain from his face. What's the matter? I asked anxiously. Juno came to Edmund's office. Lawrence's voice trembled. She's offering a deal. What kind of deal? She'll give up her claim on Miriam if I pay her half the value of the house and don't bring up her past. So she's willing to sell her own daughter? I couldn't believe my ears. It would seem so. Lawrence grinned bitterly. Edmund says she's very nervous. I guess she's afraid we're digging too deep. So she does have something to hide on, I thought. What are you going to do? Talk to her, he headed for the door. I want to hear the proposal in person and look her in the eye. I'm coming with you. I grabbed my jacket. No, Dad, he stopped me. I have to do this on my own. She's my wife and it's up to me to decide what to do. I wanted to object, but I realized he was right. It's his fight, his family, his decisions. I've already played my part in opening his eyes to what's going on. Now it was time for Lawrence to take responsibility. Okay, I nodded, but be careful. She might try to manipulate you. I know, he smiled, but I can see right through her now. When the door closed behind Lawrence, I turned back to the window. What will Juno do? Would she really be willing to give up her daughter for money? Or was this just another ploy, an attempt to buy time? A week had passed since Lawrence's visit to Edmund's office. A week of tense negotiations, legal advice, and hard decisions. Juno did offer a deal to relinquish her claim to Miriam in exchange for financial compensation. But as I suspected, it turned out to be just a ruse. As soon as Lawrence agreed to discuss terms, she made new demands. Not only half the value of the house, but also a substantial share of his future earnings. Lawrence and I decided to act decisively. Edmund filed a petition with the court to terminate Juno's parental rights on the grounds of psychological abuse of the child. At the same time, divorce and property division proceedings were initiated. Miriam remained with her father for the duration of the proceedings, and Juno was ordered to refrain from contact with the girl without the presence of a social worker. In the meantime, I set about finding permanent accommodation for Lawrence and Miriam. The temporary apartment was too small and uncomfortable. Besides, Juno knew the address and had come unannounced several times, making a scene at the entrance. After the third such occasion, I decided they needed to move farther away, preferably to a neighborhood where Juno wouldn't be looking for them. And so, on a Saturday morning, we gathered outside a small cottage on the outskirts of Biddeford. The two-story garden house, old but recently renovated, stood at the end of a quiet street surrounded by tall trees. "Are you sure it's a good idea?" Lawrence asked, getting out of the car. "The house looks expensive." "I'm not buying it, just renting it," I said, pulling out the keys. "For a year with the right to buy it back if you like it." "Still, that's too generous." He shook his head. "We could have found something simpler." "Lawrence." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Let me do it. For Miriam's sake. And for my own sake, too." Miriam was already running down the path to the front door, admiring the orchard of apple trees and the old bench under the spreading oak. "Grandfather, are we going to live here?" she shouted, turning around. "If your daddy likes it," I smiled. "Daddy, please say yes." She ran up to Lawrence. "It's so beautiful here. Look at the apple trees." Lawrence laughed, looking at his daughter's enthusiastic face. She had changed considerably in the last few days. The constant fear in her eyes had disappeared. A smile had appeared. She was beginning to behave like a normal child, not like a frightened servant. "All right," he gave up. "Let's at least see what's inside." The house was exactly as I'd hoped. Spacious, bright, with large windows and a cozy atmosphere. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen dining room, and even a small study that could serve as a workplace for Lawrence. Miriam scurried from room to room, egging delightedly and planning where she would put what. "It's too much, Dad," Lawrence said quietly when we were alone in the living room. "I can't accept such a gift." "It's not a gift, it's a help," I objected. "And besides, I'm not just doing this for you. I plan to stay in Biddeford. I've been away from my family for too long. Do you want to come back?" There was surprise in his voice. "If you don't mind," I looked him in the eye. "I'm not old anymore, Lawrence. I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone." He was silent for a moment, digesting my words. Then he smiled suddenly, an open, genuine smile, like he hadn't smiled since he was a boy. "I don't mind," he said at last. "I think Miriam will be happy to see her grandfather more than once every 15 years. "I hope so," I breathed out in relief. "So what about the house? Do you want it?" "We'll take it," he nodded. "Thanks, Dad." Miriam ran into the living room, her eyes blazing. "Daddy, there's a room upstairs with a bay window. Can I have it?" "Of course, Princess." Lawrence took her in his arms. "You can have any room you want. And can I paint the walls pink?" She held her breath. "Any color you want." He kissed the top of her head. I looked at them, feeling my heart clench with tenderness. They deserved to be happy, and I would make sure that Juno never marred their lives again. The move was set for the next day. I rented a truck, hired 2 tough guys to load the furniture, and enlisted Edmund to oversee the legality of the move. By law, Lawrence had every right to take his and his daughter's personal belongings, but we feared that Juno might cause trouble. And for good reason. When we pulled up to their old house, she was waiting on the doorstep, arms crossed over her chest. "Here you are," she sneered, looking at Lawrence with undisguised hatred. "Are you going to ruin the family?" "Juno, I'm just taking Miriam's and my things," he said tiredly. "Let's not make a scene." "Things?" She laughed bitterly. "What about the 10 years I spent making our home? Will you take those too? We'll discuss the division of property through lawyers, Edmund intervened. Right now, we're only talking about Mr. Browning and his daughter's personal effects. His daughter? Juno raised her voice. She's my daughter too. Or have you all forgotten that? No one has forgotten, I stepped forward. Shamona, but you yourself offered to give her up in exchange for money. That doesn't sound like a very caring mother, does it? She turned pale and glared at me. You, she hissed. It's all because of you. You came here and in a week you've ruined what I've spent 10 years building. You ruined it, I said calmly. Your treatment of the child, your lies, your manipulations. Don't you dare accuse me, she stepped toward me. You know nothing about me. I know enough, I didn't back down. Raymond Hatfield, North Star Transport, 50,000 pounds. Shall I go on? Juno turned even whiter, her lips trembling. For a second, I thought she was going to lash out at me with her fists, but instead she stepped aside to let us into the house. Take what you want, she hissed. But remember, this isn't over. I won't let you take everything from me. We entered the house, leaving Miriam in the car. Lawrence decided it was better for her not to see the scene. The movers began moving the furniture out of Miriam's room and Lawrence's personal belongings, while Edmund and I made sure Juno didn't cause any trouble. She stood in the living room, silently watching, sipping something from a glass. I could tell by the smell that it was whiskey, and not the first. Do you know what surprises me, Lawrence? She said suddenly, as the movers took out the last cabinet. That you believed him so easily. She nodded in my direction. The man who abandoned you for 15 years. And me, the woman who'd been there for you all that time. You didn't even give me a chance to explain myself. I gave you many chances, Juno, Lawrence replied, and you chose to lie every time. About your past, about the way you treated Miriam, about the money you wired into the Manchester account. She shuddered and spat out her whiskey. You know about the transfers? Yes, he nodded. And that the account belongs to a company owned by Raymond Hatfield, your first husband, whose existence you were so careful to deny. It's not what you think, she tried to pull herself together. I can explain. Don't bother, he shook his head. I don't believe a word you say anymore. Edmund will contact you about the divorce proceedings. Lawrence, she changed her tone suddenly, a pleading note in her voice. Think of Miriam. She needs a mother. Not a mother like you, he cut off. Goodbye, Juno. The next 2 weeks were spent in the work of setting up the new house. Miriam was delighted with her room with its pink walls and view of the garden. For the first time in a long time, she could just be a child, playing, reading, drawing, without worrying about household chores. Lawrence, too, was changing before her eyes. It was as if he had dropped an invisible weight from his shoulders, becoming more relaxed and open. Juno tried to intervene a few more times, called, came to the school, even tried to go to court with a complaint that Lawrence turns her daughter against her. But thanks to Edmund and the evidence gathered of her treatment of Miriam, all her attempts proved futile. The judge made a final ruling, limiting her contact with her daughter to once a month, supervised by social workers. Do you think she'll accept it? I asked Edmund after the hearing. I doubt it, he replied, gathering up the papers. But she has no choice. One more offense and she'll lose even these limited rights. He was right. A week after the trial, Juno came to Lawrence's house again, this time at night, drunk, demanding to see her daughter. The police had to be called. This incident was the last straw. The court completely deprived her of parental rights, and soon after that she left Biddeford, rumored to be back in Manchester, back to her first husband. I feel guilty, Lawrence confided on the evening of the day we learned of her departure. She is Miriam's mother, after all. Biological kinship doesn't make one a parent, I objected. Juno had made her own choices. Repeatedly. She chose money and control over caring for her child. I know, he sighed. But Miriam will ask questions when she's older. And you're going to answer them honestly? I put my hand on his shoulder. You'll say that her mother couldn't be a good parent, but you'll always be there for her. And so will I. He nodded and we watched in silence as Miriam played in the garden, launching the paper airplane we had made together this morning. You know, Lawrence said after a pause, I never thought we could have a life like this. A quiet, normal one. No constant tension, no fear of doing something wrong. Neither did I admitted. After Helen died, I thought it was over. That I'd live out my days alone, among books and memories. But that's not what fate had in store for me. I'm glad you came, Dad, he turned to me. Despite all this chaos, I'm glad. Me too, son, I squeezed his hand. Me too. A new chapter in our lives had begun. I bought a small house not far from Lawrence and Miriam, close enough to see them often, but far enough away so as not to interfere with their new life. Miriam went to art school. It turned out she had a real talent for drawing, which Juno had always suppressed as a waste of time. Lawrence found a new job that allowed him to spend more time with his daughter. And I finally felt at home after decades of wandering. It's been 6 months. Lawrence, Miriam, and I were sitting in the garden, enjoying a warm summer evening. The girl was drawing a portrait of both of us. Two gray-haired men, one older, one younger, very much like each other. Done. She proudly showed us her work. What do you think? Summer. Amazing, Lawrence said sincerely. You're a real artist, princess. I especially like the way you captured our smiles, I said. So real. Because you're really smiling, she shrugged. Not like before, when everyone pretended to be happy. Lawrence and I looked at each other. From a child's mouth, that simple truth sounded especially poignant. You're right, sweetheart, I stroked her head. We are happy, we really are. And it was true. Despite the hardships, despite the years of separation and pain, we had found our way back to each other. We became a family. Not a perfect one, with its scars and problems, but a real one. A family where love and care are more important than control and manipulation. Where a child can be a child, not a servant. Where past mistakes are recognized and corrected, not silenced. Miriam no longer woke up at night with nightmares. Lawrence had learned to be an attentive father. And I finally found peace in knowing that I had lived my life for a reason. That my mistakes weren't final. That there was always a chance to make things right if you had the courage to take the first step. Juno never came back into our lives. Sometimes Miriam would ask about her, and we would try to answer honestly, but without too many details. Yes, her mom made mistakes. Yes, she failed to be a good parent. But that doesn't mean Miriam isn't worthy of love and happiness. It doesn't mean she has to repeat someone else's mistakes. And every day, looking at this little but strong girl, I thanked fate for finding the strength to come to Biddeford after 15 years of estrangement. For seeing how she was treated and not remaining silent. That Lawrence and I were able to transcend pride and resentment for the sake of the future, for the sake of new beginnings. Because in the end, that's what makes us human. The ability to admit our mistakes, correct them, and move on together.